Welcome back to the Revolutionary Communist Podcast. My name is Joel Bergman. I am here with Julien Arseneau. We are from the Executive Committee of the Revolutionary Communist Party. And this week we are going to discuss why the left is so lame. So faced with the situation in the world we have today, we have a massive crisis. We have a drop in living conditions. We have wages being eaten into by inflation. We have housing crisis. People can't find a place to live. And now you have this trade war with Donald Trump, which threatens massive job losses. And you'd think that this would be the situation where the left would shine. The left would actually be able to find something to say. Generally speaking, the left means you're on the side of the working class. You're against the capitalist system in some way. This seems like a ripe environment to do that. Yet the mainstream left parties, the NDP, the New Democratic Party federally, and then in Quebec, we're going to talk about Quebec Solidaire as well, the left-wing party in Quebec, are in an absolute abysmal state, in a state of abject crisis, to be honest. We have a federal election in Canada now, and the NDP has collapsed. In the polls, they've collapsed. I think most polls show them getting under 10 seats. They will lose official party status. Jagmeet Singh, the leader, might not win his own seat. And this is the state of the left. The Quebec Solidaire equally is in fifth in the polls, behind this Conservative Party of Quebec, which doesn't even have any seats in the National Assembly. And the leader, Gabriel Nadeau Dubois, has just resigned. What we're here to discuss, what is going on? What does this all mean? Why is this happening? I think a lot of people get quite depressed because you look at the options around you and you don't see anything good. Meanwhile, we're faced with this horrible situation. So we're here to discuss what this means. I think probably the best place to start, maybe we'll first discuss the NDP and then we can go on to Quebec Solidaire in the latter half. Maybe we can first start talking about the NDP. So I don't know, Julien, if you have a few words, you can introduce us here. What's going on with the NDP?
Yeah, well, I think to understand where the NDP is at the moment, we need to rewind a bit and look at the whole epoch that just ended. Because if you think of the crisis of the left, it is tied to the crisis of capitalism. And you mentioned actually the crisis of capitalism today. It wasn't always like that. And actually in Canada in particular, after the Second World War, you had a massive boom, which actually raised the living standards of the working class. There were some concessions that were made. They were fought for, to be sure. But this created an epoch where capitalism at least seemingly seemed to raise the standard of living, improve the lives of working class people. And it had an impact on the trade unions, on the left. And it meant that for a whole historical epoch, they started to adapt to capitalism, adapt to this period of relative steps forward. It permeated the left and the trade unions that adapted to this period. Now, I think this meant that they started to stop talking about fighting for capitalism.
Fighting for socialism.
And fighting for socialism. Actually, the NDP itself, not everyone knows that, and it doesn't show today, but they were nominally socialist for the greater part of their history. They were founded by the Canadian Labour Congress and the CCF in 1961, I believe. They were supposed to be a party of the working class, nominally fighting for socialism. But that was on paper. And then this whole period of capitalist boom, started to change in the 70s. The 80s and 90s, you had massive austerity, but a real turning point was 2008 with a massive economic crisis. And then what happened is, it didn't happen immediately, but you started to have a revolt against the crisis, against capitalism. You saw it with Occupy Wall Street in 2011, the Arab Spring as well, the 2012 student strike in Quebec. But what happened to the left and to the so-called working class parties in this period, as the crisis of capitalism was getting worse and worse, they were going more and more to the right and moderating and ditching.
Trying to be responsible.
Yeah, trying to be responsible, ditching any socialist credentials. And actually, in the NDP, it took a very concrete form in 2013 when they actually voted at their convention to get rid of the socialist vocabulary in their constitution. I think you were at that convention.
Yeah, I was at that convention in Montreal. That was quite incredible because they they had this breakthrough in 2011. It was known as the Orange Wave. And I think this was an example of the radicalization where people were looking away from the main parties, and the NDP won a historic vote. They got 103 seats.
It was quite pronounced in Quebec as well. Like they had
won
never really made a real breakthrough in Quebec ever.
Yeah, they won most of the seats in Quebec.
Yeah,
They
an
won
extreme
100,
majority,
103 seats. They were the official opposition. That was under Jack Layton. Then Jack Layton died. He had cancer. And you had the entire NDP establishment, call it what you will, the bureaucracy of the party, the apparatchiks in the party, all united around Thomas Mulcair.
Mhm.
And Thomas Mulcair was actually an ex-liberal, not from the federal Liberals, actually from the Quebec Liberals, which is a very right-wing pro-capitalist party. He was a minister in Jean Charest's cabinet. Jean Charest, the guy who had put in the tuition increase in 2012 in Quebec and got kicked out, basically. So yeah, they united around Thomas Mulcair, who became the leader of the party after that. And then in 2013, they decided they were going to remove socialism from the Constitution. So it was this, they felt like, this is kind of a phenomenon you see with social democratic parties or left-wing parties that are running in the parliament, that is the closer they get to power, the more they feel like they need to moderate themselves and appear responsible. Now, responsible or realistic, or you hear this pragmatic. What this means ultimately in this context is realistic to the capitalists and their system. Moderate yourself so you're not threatening to the ruling class. And that is essentially the NDP moved in that direction. Yeah, I was at that convention in 2013 where there was this massive offensive. It was a big convention. There was a few thousand people there. There was a massive offensive by the leadership of the party, the entire bureaucracy, against the socialist roots of the party, or call it what you will, for this realism. And they thought that this is what was going to get the party elected. So I think this is connected to everything that you were saying there.
Yeah, and I think this is a common feature, as you said, that the left, the Social Democrats, as they get closer to power, they tend to bend. And obviously, we live under capitalism. There's an enormous pressure from the establishment, the media, the ruling class, to force the left to say, you should ditch these radical ideas, these utopian ideas. And unless you have a real backbone given by solid ideas, you do tend to bend to these pressures. And that's what happened with the NDP and tons of other parties all across the world. And this was also the time of the Harper Conservatives, which were hated.
Yeah.
And by 2015, which was the federal election, it was almost certain that the Conservatives were going to lose. And actually, the NDP was first in the polls in that summer. They were on their way to probably win their first federal election ever. And then what did Thomas Mulcair do? They started to moderate and to, they talked about balanced budgets. I think even increasing the number of policemen. It's at that time, if I remember correctly, that video came out of Mulcair when he was a liberal, a Quebec liberal, praising Margaret Thatcher of all people.
Yeah, he said it was the winds of change.
Yeah, that's right. And he didn't, how do you say? He didn't. Well, he said, yeah, that was.
He didn't say he was wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the word that I was looking for. So yeah, and what happened is they got outflanked on the left by the Trudeau Liberals. So and they completely missed that opportunity.
Yeah, Trudeau said, "You can't beat Tommy Douglas on a Stephen Harper budget," which I think summed up what was going on. Is that the Liberals are a very crafty party. It's not for nothing that they're known as the party of government, that they've been in power for, I think, 70% of the history of Canada, because they're quite opportunist. They're very good political opportunists. They're able to figure out what way the wind's blowing, and they're able to abandon any principles that they may or may not have had. And Justin Trudeau was a very calculated move by the Liberals to the left, or whatever you want to call it. It wasn't really to the left, ultimately, because they're still a right-wing capitalist party. But at least in the way that they were presenting themselves, they were doing this left-wing turn in order that the NDP didn't win, and then they could get in power. And that's really what the Justin Trudeau government even was. It was to try to, because there was this big interest in socialism. A lot of people hate capitalism. Nobody wants austerity measures. People are very upset about racism and the oppression of minorities and sexism and stuff like this. And the Trudeau Liberals were this attempt to appear as though they were doing something.
Yeah. And if I can add, I think a feature of the epoch of the last decade and a couple decades is more and more people are seeing capitalism for what it is: a system where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and they're looking for a solution, for alternatives.
Yep.
And they don't see these parties as alternatives because they tend, as people are reaching radical conclusions, they get closer to the center, to the right wing. And actually, the 2015 debacle of the NDP was at the same time that Bernie Sanders was picking up in the
Yeah,
US. It was a
exactly.
time of when he was running
Revolution
the
against the
Democratic-
billionaire class.
yeah,
et
for the
cetera.
Democratic Party, which was a mistake. But the point is, Bernie Sanders, a self-proclaimed socialist, was gaining a lot of attraction. It was showing that people were looking for change in the US, and that process was mirrored elsewhere in the world. You had this polarization with Trump on the right, Sanders on the left. And actually, after the election, after everything was said and done, Mulcair himself said, "Oh yeah, I'm a socialist too."
Yeah,
it was
but he
meaningless by
But
that
he
point.
said that in a context in which that was a massive letdown. The party was reduced from 103
yeah.
seats to 30 something. And everyone had that united around Mulcair, and they said that this was the way, with this nice, responsible, ex-liberal guy, this is going to get us into power. The NDP's never been in power. It's been one of those things they talk about. We never been in power. How do we get in power? How do you form government? This is like, oh, the left, it's all well and good, you guys. You talk a lot about left wing, this, that, and the other thing, but we have to win government. This was basically what the point that Tony Blair was making with what he did to the Labour Party in Britain. You see what happened. Take government, support the war in Iraq, implement massive tuition fees, privatizations, attacks on working class people. That's what that means. So the NDP was pivoting in that direction. But it was an electoral disaster. It was an electoral disaster. And then Mulcair became quite unpopular in the party amongst the rank and file. I think the leadership still wanted him. But they went into a convention. I was there. It was
2016, was it? Yeah.
2016 in Edmonton. I went. It was quite interesting because everybody wanted a Bernie Sanders. Everybody wanted some kind of bold socialist-y type thing. And that's when Mulcair started saying, "Oh, I'm a socialist too." All of a sudden, after it removed socialism, this is what you can't believe these people when they talk because they're just trying to tell you what you want to hear.
That's right, yeah.
Very polished politician, Mulcair, in that way. But it didn't work. Convention happened, and the vote on the leadership, which is traditional, what happens at a convention, quite often, most of the time, leaders get 90-something% approval, maybe almost 100%. Jack Layton was almost 100% approval most of the time. Mulcair, he got, I can't remember, it was 40-something.
Yeah.
It was the first time that had ever happened when a leader had been rejected. So that was the result of this policy. And that leads us to Jagmeet Singh, because then they had a leadership race, and Jagmeet Singh came in. Now, Jagmeet Singh came in as a way for the bureaucracy, the same people that were there when Mulcair had become the leader of the party, as a way that they could still control the situation.
Mm-hmm.
He's a creature of the bureaucracy. He has no ideas of his own. I'm convinced of this. He's just a figurehead, ultimately. It was an attempt to have a bit more of a left-wing face with the bureaucracy still maintaining control. Ultimately, that's how we got where we are today.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, obviously, the Liberals have been in power for 10 years. And now until Trump and Carney, they were hated. And, that hatred of the establishment is not gone. It's temporarily cut across somewhat. But I think a big turning point as well was, obviously, the Liberals have been in the minority since 2019.
Yeah.
And the NDP never thought of bringing them down, but the turning point
they voted with them all through that process.
Yeah, exactly. But especially since 2021, that election, which produced exactly the same result as 2019, another Liberal minority government, and then the NDP actually propped up the Liberals in a much more concrete way with this supply and confidence.
It's basically a coalition.
Yeah, the non-coalition coalition where they propped him up without having ministers or anything like that, which came at a moment of abject crisis. It was COVID. And not only that, actually, the Liberals right before had taken away the right to strike of the Montreal dock workers in the spring of 2021.
Postal workers?
The postal workers was 2018.
2018, right.
But anyway, the Liberals already had this track record, and the NDP thought, what better time than now to to prop them up? They explained that it would be to gain some things for the workers and the poor. Probably not using that vocabulary actually, but they had a few things they wanted to get out of the Liberals, and thinking that would maybe increase their credentials, but that's not what happened at all actually.
No, they just became completely tarnished. This is the whole thing. The NDP now, the position of the NDP now is actually largely it's okay. It is how they are operating and how they're putting themselves forward right now is having an impact on them decreasing in the polls, them not being seen as different from the Liberals. But it's also the entire history. People have a memory. People remember what you did or what you did not do, and they remember the NDP in power propping up Justin Trudeau, not just propping up Justin Trudeau, refusing to bring him down again and again and again, as he legislated workers back to work, took away their right to strike. Not even legislated, actually. Just we talked about this previously, but they last year they threw this weird loophole rule or something that they didn't even legislate. There was no vote, there was no discussion. They took away the right to strike of postal workers, rail workers, dock workers.
The last year has been pretty incredible. Like, actually, if you remember, Joel, the justification of the NDP for propping up the Liberals in the first place, they said, oh, there's a lot of what was the word, uncertainty, or the situation is volatile. They were talking about COVID, about the economy.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, that's a feature of the reformists. As the crisis of capitalism deepens, they kind of see themselves as trying to try to restore stability,
credibility in the establishment.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah. They're scared,
Exactly. Whereas the left wing, like a working class party, with the aim of fighting for socialism, should actually use the moments of crisis to denounce the system, to say, see, this is the system as it really is. And that's why we need to overthrow it. But then they saw the opposite. Oh, there's a lot of uncertainty. Therefore, we need to prop up the Liberals. But yeah, the last year has been crazy. Obviously, this is the year of the genocide in Gaza, which
they did not bring the government down.
Exactly. Yeah, the Liberals supported Israel, made that very, very clear. And the NDP didn't think it would be wise to bring them down on that. And as you mentioned, they broke 3 strikes this year: the dock workers, the railway workers, and the CUPW workers, the postal workers. So yeah, I mean, throughout this period of attacks against the workers and a big change in consciousness where people, instinctively sympathizing with the Palestinian people, the NDP were seen as complicit in a genocide.
They were complicit.
They were, yeah, that's
essentially.
right.
They were.
Yeah.
That's what that means.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is how the party got here. And then, a lot of people on the left go, oh, Pierre Poilievre, and the right wing, the conservative right, the Trump types. I heard people talk about Pierre Poilievre, he's like a fascist or something. But let's be honest, the only reason he's able to do what he does is because of the failure of the NDP and the failure of the left, the complicity of the left in the situation that many working class people see. And Pierre Poilievre, obviously, he's very crafty. He knows this. He's putting forward a very kind of pro-working class. He uses that language, pro-working class. He's just endorsed by the Boilermakers Union because of what he's been doing. He came up with this thing, his industrial policy called boots, not suits. You can see what he's doing, meaning working class people, not the financial elites.
Yeah, career politician, always in suits, but he's
always
still trying.
In a suit. I don't wonder if he was in a suit when he made that announcement. I can't remember.
Probably.
But yeah, obviously he's a hypocrite. He's a bastard. We don't trust Pierre Poilievre. But the point is that the NDP's policy has left that field open for right popular. And all over the world, you're seeing the betrayal of the left. Germany, Schultz, Social Democratic Party. They're part of the same international as the NDP, I believe. In government betraying, what does that lead to? The rise of the AFD. Starmer in government in the UK. This is what the NDP would do. The NDP would probably govern in a very similar way to these parties. What happens? The rise of the right. But they don't need to be in power. The thing is, the anger is in society. People are looking for an alternative. They're angry at the capitalist establishment. And the NDP have joined hands with the establishment, which has enabled the right wing to rise.
Yeah. And I think, the NDP has made itself right now completely irrelevant because they were tarnished by the Liberals, by propping up the Liberals. And now with the change in the situation, with Trump coming to power, the trade war, there is this fear, and it was discussed on the previous podcast. Now, okay, you have the NDP virtually indistinguishable from the Liberals, and many people probably think to themselves, maybe they don't dislike the NDP, but they're like, if I want a Liberal, I'll get the real thing.
Yeah.
And actually, Thomas Mulcair, of all people, penned an opinion piece this week where he talks about, he says something along the lines of, it is a contest between the Conservatives and the Liberals, and if you cannot reasonably form a government against Trump, get out of the way. So he's saying, the NDP, get out of the way. So this guy who orchestrated the turn to the right in the NDP is saying, now there's no point voting NDP.
Well, the thing is that who's to blame for this? Well, the entire NDP bureaucracy that supported Mulcair, that's still in control now, that's behind Jagmeet Singh, are basically now stabbed in the back because of their own stupid mistake in supporting Mulcair and the moderation of the party. That is essentially what this means.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising Mulcair says that. He is a liberal. He's supporting the liberals. Of course he is.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, this is the situation. I think maybe we should go to the current moment though, because okay, you got the past is the past, but the current moment, yeah, it is true. They're mostly they are pretty much made themselves irrelevant because of their actions, but also the way they're currently acting, the NDP makes it seem like they're not all that different than the liberals. Although I will say the things that they do speak out and say certain things different than the liberals, but it's
Not
only
in the right way.
It's only to say that they would be like Justin Trudeau. But Justin Trudeau was in power for 10 years. He essentially ruled like the NDP would, with a slightly left-wing kind of thing, a few little reforms here and there, a tokenistic, for lack of a better term, woke kind of way of presenting himself. You know, it's 2015. I got half the women in my cabinet, but I can still implement horrible policies. You know, this is really what the NDP would do. And so Justin Trudeau's gone. Mark Carney is actually a step to the right. He's a central banker. He's immediately cut the capital gains tax. He's cut the carbon tax that Trudeau had implemented. He's eliminated federal regulations, oversight on infrastructure projects. This is a step to the right from Justin Trudeau. And all the NDP has really said is that they would put the capital gains tax back in, that they would basically do what Justin Trudeau was doing, which everyone sees has failed. And Justin Trudeau had a lower approval rating than Joe Biden. So the NDP actually prove that they're pretty bankrupt. They're not proposing anything different.
Yeah.
They're proposing to keep doing what everyone hated, actually.
Yeah, it's a bit farcical. I think you were telling me, Joel, we have a comrade writing an article on the NDP right now.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's going to be on the website soon. But the comrade was asking, hey, where can I find the NDP program? He couldn't find it.
Google it. You won't find it.
Google it. You won't find it. It's quite crazy. But that tells you everything you need to know. And actually, in this period of trade war, they've been actually doubling down and going even further than the Liberals sometime in this Canadian nationalist frenzy, you know.
Canada's not for sale. Doug Ford said that, and then they adopted it too. They all said the same thing. They didn't call him out. Actually,
no, that's right.
They should have called him out. They said, "You're a hypocrite. You've been selling Canada. You've been privatizing things." They didn't say that.
Yeah, and obviously this question of military spending. It's a big question that's been put on the agenda. Well, by the ruling class. In a general sense, there is this push towards militarism all across the world. And this
push by Trump.
Whipping up a frenzy.
It's actually a demand of Trump.
Dramatically increase with Trump. And what's it? Mark Carney proposes to increase military spending to 2% of GDP by 2030. And Jagmeet Singh proposed to raise it to 2% by 2032.
Yeah,
which is funny. And also, he went further than that. He said, "Oh, we need to buy F-35s, but they should be built in Canada." Which is ridiculous.
So yeah, Mark Carney says he's going to review the F-35 purchase from America. Jagmeet Singh goes one step further, said, "I will review and make sure that they're produced in Canada." So Jagmeet Singh's in favor of Canadian imperialism. He's in favor of militarism as long as it's a made in Canada imperialism.
Right. Yeah, and actually his target to reach 2% by 2032, if I'm not mistaken, was the target Trudeau was proposing.
It's the same target.
So when
he's signaling he's going to be the same as Trudeau.
That's right, exactly. So, and no wonder that nobody sees the NDP as an option right now. And actually, it mirrors the crisis that you see in the NDP provincially. I mean, provincially it's a bit different. They are in power in BC, in Manitoba, but you've seen the same general process of veering to the right. Presenting themselves as a party of the establishment. I think in BC it's more pronounced than anywhere else. And the other thing is also fighting against the left wing within the NDP over Palestine. It wasn't only supporting the Trudeau Liberals. Supporting the genocide, they were actively fighting against pro-Palestine voices inside the party. I think that the main case is Sarah Jama here in Ontario, but there's many others. So they've been fighting any voice of dissent on the left inside the party, both provincially and federally.
Yeah, exactly. So this is really, And what? And actually, I think the question is why do they do that? You can talk to NDP members of parliament. You can talk to some NDP activists who are like, "Oh, I'm in solidarity with Palestine. I think the genocide's bad." Blah, blah, blah. But then what happens is the media, the capitalist media, the imperialist media, the mainstream parties, the liberals and the conservatives, they make a big stink about something. Sarah Jama was like this. What did she say? She had a pretty innocuous statement. Actually, it was a statement. She basically said something about calling Israel, oh, it's an apartheid state, and don't like the genocide. I want to fight against it. And she wore a keffiyeh to the parliament. They told her she couldn't wear the keffiyeh because it's a political statement. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, a political statement in parliament. Who?
Yeah, in a parliament. Oh my god,
how crazy!
And then they said that, and the NDP demanded the media had a, for lack of a better term, shitstorm about Sarah Jama and her statement. The NDP forced her to apologize, and she did. Which, our opinion, that was a mistake.
Yeah.
She should have never apologized. Never apologized. It's like Corbyn. He apologized for the so-called anti-Semitism, which didn't exist or was overblown. Anti-Semitism's in society, but in the Labour Party, it's lower than anywhere else. So, and it definitely didn't come from Corbyn. So what are you talking about? It was just a weaponized identity politics against him. A similar thing, though, with Sarah Jama. And they forced her to apologize. And then what'd she say? Or what happened? They expelled her.
Yeah.
She actually ran as an independent in the Ontario election. She lost. I think she got 4th place. But yeah, this is what the NDP has done. Jagmeet Singh said nothing about that. He didn't say anything about that as the Ontario party excluded pro-Palestine activists from their ranks.
Yeah.
This is the situation.
And I think there's a general point here in terms of like what is the left and why do they seem to do the same thing everywhere? Yeah. It's a contradiction because these parties are founded or created at least on paper to defend the working class and to take the side of the workers against the capitalists. But we live under a class society, and there's always this pressure of the ruling class. Yeah. So they are stuck between this pressure of the working class, which they sometimes express in talking against the capitalists. But then there's this massive ideological pressure and sometimes economic pressure, and they bend to it all the time. Yeah. So it's what this reflects is the general. It's not a question of personality. Like, I mean, Jagmeet is. Whatever. He's just a guy, but the point is,
might be a nice guy.
I have no idea. I mean, he seems nice sometimes. I guess that is completely beside the point. It is their organic weakness that they cannot imagine a world where the working class overthrows capitalism. So they tend to adapt to the system and bend to it and make concessions. So it comes from the profound ideological weakness of the left reformists. Actually, sometimes the right wing, the Tony Blairs and these people, they're not. They don't hide that they're in favor of capitalism, but there's these figures sometimes that want to take the side of the workers, but also don't believe you can overthrow capitalism. So they're always stuck in these contradictions, trying to square the circle. And it doesn't work. It doesn't appeal to anyone. Actually, many times they try to please everyone and therefore please absolutely no one.
When they essentially argue that they can't take a consistent policy, they have to play politics.
Yeah.
And they have to capitulate to the fear-mongering of the right. They always complain about the media. The media is saying something. Yeah. I'm like, the media is capitalist media. And they're always going to say bad shit if you are defending a genuine working-class socialist policy, or if you're defending a policy opposed to Canadian imperialism in solidarity with Palestine, for example. They're always going to say a bunch of stuff. They're going to make up a bunch of stuff. They're going to lie. They're going to slander. That is the role of the capitalist media. Yeah. But just because the capitalist media is doing that doesn't mean you have to go, oh, Sarah Jama was wrong, or whoever is wrong, or you might have a point about X, Y, Z. No. You stand firm. You denounce them.
Actually, do you remember one of the examples that just popped to my mind is when the Wet'suwet'en struggle happened in 2020, right before COVID. The indigenous people defending their lands.
Yeah, in British Columbia. Yeah.
In British Columbia against the construction of a pipeline. And there was a vicious crackdown by the RCMP. Under an NDP government.
They were beating people, arresting people up. Yeah.
Yeah, it was an NDP government in BC.
That called them RCMP on them. Yeah.
That's right. And there was a mass movement in Canada, some demos supporting the Wet'suwet'en all across the country. And then what did Jagmeet Singh say? I support the rule of law.
Yeah, well, they kept asking him to explain himself, and he just kept repeating it.
That's right. Yeah, so he could not take openly, unapologetically the side of the Wet'suwet'en people. And he didn't really openly take a crass pro-bourgeois position. But he did this mushy middle thing which appeals to precisely no one, and that's a feature of these reformists all the time,
I
really.
think that really caps it off here. That this is one of the main problems with NDP. It's they that people don't trust them. Why would you trust them? You think they're going to fight
Mhm.
for you? Jagmeet Singh says, "I'll never stop fighting for you." Yes, you will. We've seen you
Yeah, that's
capitulate
right.
time and time again on key questions. So nobody trusts them. But that also leads that also doesn't come out of nowhere. It's because they accept the capitalist system. They accept the capitalist system, and they also believe. And honestly, this has always been something with the NDP. They believe in a slow, reformist way through the parliament
Hmm.
and etc. You got to be realistic and pragmatic and all that sort of stuff. They're not revolutionaries. There's a difference between reformism and revolution. And reformism, we always say betrayal is inherent in reformism,
Actually, what we
precisely because of this.
yeah, and the point is actually we don't criticize the reformists because they fight for reforms.
Well, it's
Actually,
opposite. Yeah.
we criticize them because they don't fight. They actually never put up a fight and never win anything of substance for the working class. So that's the point. You need to be a revolutionary and a revolutionary party to do so, to win anything. Actually, in history, any significant reform was the byproduct of a revolution or fear of revolution or a mass movement.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, these people, it's precisely because they can't fight and they can't win. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's the NDP. So the election is occurring on April 28th in about a month. The polls seems like the Liberals are even going up in the polls. I mean, the
Mhm.
polls are the polls. You don't really know, but the Donald Trump phenomenon seems to be the dominant dynamic in the election, and the NDP don't really have much to say on that issue. They've capitulated on border security. They've capitulated on military spending, and they're basically saying almost the same things in terms of we got to protect Canadian companies, we got to buy Canadian, et cetera, which we've talked about before. So they appear no different, and because they appear no different, well, I'm gonna vote. I've actually talked to some people I know, some friends, non-political friends, that say they're gonna vote for Mark Carney, and I was like, why? And I detailed. We talked. You should listen to the podcast if you haven't. That me and Marco recorded a couple weeks ago, detailing who Mark Carney is. The central banker. He's an elite. He's and all the policies and things that he's signaling. He's going to move more to the right. Actually, Pierre Poilievre is accusing Mark Carney of stealing. He says you're plagiarizing my
Stealing
program.
my program. Yeah.
Yeah, stealing my program, which is true. And I
Yeah.
raise it. People go, "Well, I know, but what else are you going to do?" Because I know and if you bring up the NDP, which I don't usually bring up because it's largely irrelevant, but sometimes people bring it up. Well, the NDP, it's not really that different. So
Well,
I'm
they
going to
have
vote
a
for
point.
the Liberals. Long ago, actually, Pierre Elliott Trudeau called the NDP liberals in a hurry, and he wasn't entirely wrong about that. They quite often just appear to be slightly different than the Liberals,
Mhm.
slightly, not enough to get you to vote for them. In
Yeah.
all fundamental questions, they agree with the Liberals.
Hmm.
And if people are going to vote for the Liberals, they're going to vote for the real Liberals, not going to vote for someone pretending to be a Liberal. Yeah, and so that's really what's happened with the NDP. It doesn't look good.
Hmm.
But it's not a reason to be depressed. It's a reason to be a revolutionary and to not be a reformist and to actually have no faith in this system and to have no faith in the bourgeois parliament or anything like that. Anyway, we'll talk more about that at the end. But I thought now is a good time to transition on to talking about actually probably in the grand scheme of things, maybe not bigger news, but quite significant news in Quebec Solidaire. Now we're doing this in English. I know that we recorded a podcast in French the other day. You did with Hélène talking about this, but yeah, a lot of people in English would not have maybe noticed this. This is how the media cycle works. In English, they don't talk about significant developments that happen in Quebec a lot of the time. Unless they're fear mongering about independence or something like that, the nationalists are coming. But there has been very significant developments.
Yeah.
In Quebec Solidaire, which is the left-wing party. The NDP doesn't exist provincially in Quebec. So you have Quebec Solidaire, which, just to give a bit of an introduction, Quebec Solidaire is a relatively new party. It was formed in 2006. I don't think I am anymore. I think it's definitely, I live in Ontario now, but I became a member of Quebec Solidaire in 2007. And this party was really different. Actually put itself forward as a new party, a different type of left-wing party, not like the NDP, actually. Because the NDP was largely seen in Quebec as it's kind of like the Labour Party in Britain. They're not very left-wing. They're not very radical. They had just betrayed in Ontario with Bob Rae, who had imposed austerity measures after promising all sorts of stuff. So it was seen as not a very good option. So QS came out, and there was lots of Marxists and communists and socialists. It was generally seen as an anti-capitalist party. The party pledged itself to fight to overcome capitalism, to nationalize the banks, the mines, certain things. It was quite a bold left-wing party, and it was quite inspiring in the early days. But a lot's happened since 2006. It's been almost 20 years, and the party is, like I said, last in the polls. And the leader, Gabriel Nadeau Dubois, who was the main leader of the 2012 student strike. Then he entered politics. He'd been the leader of QS for, 8 years?
Yeah.
And he has now resigned. He is resigned, and there's been, to be honest, a low-key or almost open crisis in the party for about a year now. But yeah, maybe we could talk about this. Why is this happening? QS is also having a crisis. I thought QS was supposed to be different,
Yeah.
but it doesn't appear so. So it's like they're having a lot of trouble too. So maybe you could introduce that. We could talk about that.
Yeah, no, it is a very important development in Quebec. Everyone is talking about it. Everyone knows there's a crisis in QS unless you live under a rock. It's been in the media endlessly for the last week. And it came, in a sense, it came out of nowhere. It's not a surprise that GND, Gabriel Nadeau Dubois, GND, that's how he's known, resigned. It's not a total surprise, but it was not tied to any specific question going on. He just went on paternity leave, and came back and said, you know what, I'm out. So there's no specific reason. But yeah, actually, to add some context to the formation of QS, because it does explain what's going on. Like, it was at a time of actually a rise in class struggle. And not just in Quebec, but internationally. You had the anti-globalization movement, the Venezuelan Revolution, and the discredit of the social democratic parties in a lot of the world. And QS was part of this process. There was the 2005 Quebec student strike, which was the first big one before the 2012 movement. And actually in Quebec at the time, there was the Manifeste pour un Québec lucide, manifesto for a clear-eyed view. Is that the way you say it?
Yeah, clear-eyed vision of Quebec.
Yeah, which was signed by these capitalists,
Lucien
these right-wing
Bouchard,
politicians. Lucien Bouchard, the former PQ prime minister, signed onto it. So both
former minister of Brian Mulroney's
That's
conservative government.
That's
in the
right.
80s.
Yeah. So basically, right-wing nationalists and federalists all uniting to say, the state is bloated. We need privatization. All of that, and then
increase the cost of education, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah. And there was a counter manifesto called a manifesto for a Quebec Solidaire, for Quebec of Solidarity, whatever you want to call it. And out of this came QS, which was a mix of community group and socialist and communist organization. So the impulse that led to the rise of QS, to its rise as a party, was this anti-capitalist mood and this rise of class struggle. However, as we've explained previously, there's always that pressure under capitalism to ditch your radical ideas, to be reasonable, to be moderate. So there was always that tension in QS. And yes, in 2009, they came out with this manifesto talking about fighting against capitalism.
That was right after the crash, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. After the 2008 crash, and they released the manifesto on May Day. Very significant. But then, yes, there was always this pressure to moderate. And it was already, even before GND was there, it was present. Even the leaders were talking, we need to be realistic. Amir Kadir, which was one of the main figureheads of the party, said, some people think we're radicals, but we're reformists. We accept the principle of reform. So you always saw that tension. But yeah, QS on the one hand had this potential to become a voice of a vehicle for the working class. But then there was also that pressure. And then when GND took over in 2017, it took a much more clear turn in the direction of moderating the party program.
He was seen as a savior, People
Yeah,
saw him
yeah.
as like, oh, wow, because he was so famous and so popular after 2012.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book. He was, because of the events, he was seen as
Yeah.
extremely popular figure.
Well, actually, the membership of the party doubled overnight when he announced he was running for the leadership of the party. But and why was that? It was actually because of what he represented as the main figurehead of the 2012 student strike. I remember at the time, that was before I joined the organization. Like, Gabriel Nadeau Dubois was like a hero to thousands of young people. So yeah, that's what he represented, and the ruling class knew it. Like, there was a bunch of right-wing media scaremongering, blah blah. Oh, GND, this is this is the Bolsheviks. Blah blah.
I remember
They were
when
crazy.
he joined, he said,
Yes.
the other parties have betrayed Quebec for 30 years.
Yeah, something like that.
And
Yeah.
they freaked out
Yeah.
because they're like, "Are you saying the Parti Québécois has?" Because obviously, a lot of people in Quebec on the left think, okay, the Liberals have betrayed. But then there's always this question: has the PQ betrayed? It's because of nationalism. A lot of people on the left are also nationalists, so they can't admit that the PQ is betrayed. The
Yeah.
PQ has betrayed.
Yeah, they enacted massive austerity in the 80s and
legislated
90s.
the nurses back to work. They crushed the nurses' strike in 1999. They even under René Lévesque in the 1980s, they crushed the workers, instituted austerity measures, public sector wage compressions,
Yeah.
the loi de matraque, the baton law, basically to take away the right to strike. This the PQ has betrayed. I mean,
Yeah.
and they've been in power almost half the time, and living conditions have declined nonetheless under the Parti Québécois. So
Yeah.
it was correct what he said,
Yeah.
that these parties have betrayed.
And the funny thing is, he retracted himself almost immediately. He
Yeah,
said,
he
I
backed
didn't
off.
mean everyone betrayed. But actually, this is the point, because GND came in a sense, in the eyes of many people, representing the 2012 student movement. That's why people liked it and hated it. But it was not the same GND. It was already a lot more moderate, a lot more
Yeah, what did
trying
he
to,
say? I've matured.
Yeah, I've matured. That's what he said at the time. So the point is, ever since then, there's been this sometimes open but mostly sneaky struggle against the anti-capitalist roots of QS, and that's what we saw
Very
all
dishonest.
through GND's tenure. Yeah,
Very dishonest, yeah.
Yeah,
Same thing in the NDP. The NDP degenerated politically, and the people that were doing the degenerating didn't say openly what they were doing,
yeah,
but they
yeah,
were moving the party to the right into a more acceptable, pragmatic, realistic,
yeah,
which meant what is acceptable and pragmatic for capitalism and for the ruling class. That's what that meant.
yeah,
So GND was doing the same thing, not
Yeah.
just him and I think the whole, if you want to call it a bureaucracy in QS, which started to exist,
yeah.
united around him and belief in this idea. Yeah.
And that was especially the case after 2018, because the 2018 Quebec election was actually a bit it shows the opposite point, because QS made its first breakthrough. They doubled their votes, tripled their number of MNAs, members of National
It
Assembly.
was kind of like the Orange Wave, but on a provincial level. A
Orange
little
little, a little
Yeah,
wave,
yeah.
whatever you call that. But
bit. It was significant.
yeah, but it was significant also because in that campaign in 2018, QS ran, like, the main ideas that we're getting across were free tuition from daycare to university, cutting the cost of public transit in half. Manon Moissé, sorry, the leader of the PQ was saying, "Oh, QS is a Marxist party," and they weren't denying it. Like, they weren't.
She said yes.
She said something like, "Oh, if being in favor of a better minimum wage, taking the side of the workers, is Marxist, then we are Marxist." So none of these attacks worked, and QS made a breakthrough based on having mostly these bold demands
Yeah.
that would appeal to working class people. But then after that, it was this change, this massive change in the party, where
Well, because
GND.
at that time you had this. That's when the CAQ, the right-wing nationalist party, came to power,
Mhm.
and the Liberals and the PQ were completely discredited. I think for a period, neither one of them even have a leader, and QS was they had about the same amount of votes, actually, almost the same amount of votes.
Yeah.
And they were seen as the opposition.
Yeah.
They effectively were the opposition.
That's an important point. Yeah.
And GND and Manon Massé were saying we are a party of government. We're going to be
preparing to govern.
Yeah,
That's what they were saying.
Yeah. We're preparing to govern.
Yeah.
That is essentially what they were putting forward. So that you could see in the language and the way they're talking, govern, and what we wrote at the time, we were saying, govern for who? That's the question. Govern for who? And they were putting themselves to govern for capitalism, to be a safe pair of hands, to not be too unrealistic, right?
Yeah.
Which meant, anyway, I interrupted you. Maybe
No,
you
it's
continue.
it's all good, because it's an important point, because after the 2018 election, it was the worst result in the Liberals' history and the worst result in the PQ's history, at least since their early days.
It was rejection of the establishment.
Exactly, and there was every reason to believe that QS would become the main opposition to the CAC, and that the PQ in particular was on the road to destruction. Everybody saw that. But then, yes, preparing to govern. How did that manifest itself? There's a litany of examples of, like, small things GND and his clique at the top did. I'll just take two examples. Like, the 2021 Congress was a turning point, because you had a bunch of setbacks on key questions, and also a lot of resolutions were put forward by the left wing of the party, by the Marxists, to fight for nationalization, fight the housing crisis, and all of that. And actually, at that Congress, I remember, it was quite special. The MNAs came into the discussion against every left-wing proposal. But then the one that was really significant in more than one way was free tuition. They voted to water down their position on free tuition, to not say free tuition in the first mandate, but eventually at some point. And, free tuition is what got GND popular in the first place, leading a student strike.
It's a historic demand of the Quebec student movement.
And one of the party employees, one of GND's friends, said on Twitter at the time, he said, this Congress is, They voted against the less down-to-earth proposals. We
Right.
didn't see that before in QS. And he was absolutely right with that we didn't see that before. But the point, down-to-earth, we can get to that in a minute. But this is what was happening. Under GND, there was this in French, we say recentrage, like go towards recentering, and moderation of the party program. And then the
It's
other
not
thing...
to this. There's no such thing as a center. They were moving to the right.
No,
That's what
exactly.
That's what that
So
is.
that's what happened under GND in a nutshell. But it's not only the party program; it's also in the way GND and the leadership presented themselves. Like they went out of their way to look as part of the establishment, to not rock the boat.
Always wearing a suit, you know.
Yeah, wearing a suit.
Even the whole thing with Catherine Dorion, she wouldn't wear a suit. She's wearing Doc Martens and a
that's
hoodie.
an important one we might want to explain because I'm sure that didn't make its way out of Quebec.
Yeah, she was Catherine Dorion was a member of the National Assembly for QS, and she was an artist and a bit of a rabble-rouser. She's hard to control.
Talked about revolution.
Hard to control, and she would kind of just go out of her way and say what she thought. She wasn't controllable by the bureaucracy, and she would wear whatever she wanted also, which was Doc Martens.
Wow, scandal.
And a hoodie or whatever, or wasn't it
in Parliament?
in Parliament.
The hoodie in Parliament.
And they accused her of the CAQ accused her of breaking parliamentary decorum, and the party actually agreed with them and censored her. Told her she needed to change. Anyway, she ended up resigning because she couldn't stand it. Right?
Yeah. And then she published a book in 2023, basically saying what we already knew, that GND and his clique were trying to make QS reasonable, crack down on herself and her antics, which were actually very popular. she was by far the most popular MNA. And actually, I remember speaking of this question of the establishment, she posted a photo on Facebook of like my level of attention in Parliament, and then there was a graph that showed like 0. And people
I imagine it would be pretty boring being in that
talking
Parliament.
shop, an empty talking shop. So that was also what was happening. Not just changes in the program, because some people actually in QS, we should mention that nobody fought against GND for real. Like we were organized in the International Marxist Tendency Collective, fighting for a socialist program. And we were told, don't rock the boat, stop criticizing the leadership. It's not what you think, So GND was able to, he actually did transform QS without a fight, really. And Catherine Dorion, she wrote that book. And she also didn't say anything when she was an MNA. So nobody fought this course. But the point is, it was both in the program and in the way the party presented itself, which meant that come the 2022 election in particular, what's the difference between QS and the PQ? And that's what many people are saying today. It's like, okay, you have the nationalists or the PQ. Why would I vote for the pale copy of the PQ? So that's what happened. GND has transformed QS into this moderate, good-looking party that seeks to be accepted by the establishment, which will probably not happen. The establishment will never like QS.
And the results speak for themselves.
Yeah. They're fifth in the polls.
Now he's saying, my work is done here. I've destroyed the party.
Yeah.
And I don't want to deal with the consequences of my actions. That's basically what he's saying, and he's leaving.
And the funny thing is actually when that 2021 Congress happened, Thomas Mulcair, in an interview said, this looks a lot like what I did in the NDP.
He was saying, right. Good, I like GND. He's doing the right thing.
Yeah, moderating. Yeah.
It's so funny that I know that Mulcair and Jean-François Lisée, who's the next PQ leader, they've had some chats about this on podcasts on the radio, and they both kind of see eye to eye. Because they both used to be, they're both failed leaders. They're both failed leaders. But Mulcair's a bit different because he was in the NDP and he said, he basically doesn't see that what he did was wrong, even though it led to the electoral defeat of the NDP.
Yeah.
And he thinks it's good what GND's doing, even though this is one thing. These self-assured reformists, they talk quite often against Marxists and against revolutionaries. You're unrealistic. You don't know what you're talking about. So they're so self-assured in their moderation. The question is why? Because they base themselves on capitalism, so they have the entire backing of the capitalist establishment, of capitalist ideology behind them, telling them, socialism is unrealistic. These things are not down to earth, right? Behind them, and they have a sense of confidence. They have a sense of confidence in doing so. And so really, this is what this ultimately represents, is they're bending to the bourgeois establishment. The results, but the funny thing is the results speak for themselves.
Yeah.
The results speak for themselves. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
People call us unrealistic. Well, where is the strong left reformists? Where's the strong reformist party in power?
Yeah.
And also, even if, okay, we have an election right now, maybe the NDP gets elected. Maybe monkeys fly. I don't know. Maybe
Big maybe,
QS somehow pulls it out of the fire and is able to get elected in the next election, which is next year.
2026. Yeah.
Yeah, next year. Maybe. It seems unlikely. It's possible. Does anyone believe that they will rule fundamentally different? Does anyone really believe that? We've seen what the NDP did in Alberta. We've seen what the NDP do in British Columbia. We've seen what Olaf Scholz doing in Germany, what Starmer's doing. And actually, even I'm talking mostly about social democratic parties, like the long-standing social democratic parties. You could say, oh, those parties are different, like the NDP. QS is a new party. Well, what about Syriza in Greece? They betrayed. And what was the argument? Oh, the crisis is so severe, we can't do what we want to do. They might kick us out of the EU. We have to implement austerity measures. And they did. Tsipras, the leader of Syriza, which was the coalition of the radical left, which is a new party, and actually they were friendly with Quebec Solidaire on the international level. And what would they? Does anyone believe they do differently? So I think you have many examples like this around the world. This is why we need to be very clear what we need. We need a revolutionary party. We need to be revolutionaries. We cannot accept this reformist parliamentary view, which is the road. Not only does it not work, but it also doesn't lead you to get elected, I would say.
Yeah.
And even if you do get elected, it doesn't lead anywhere good.
Yeah, and I think with we can bring it back to QS to say a couple of things.
Yeah,
This fear of rocking the boat is quite crazy. Like they seem really to look over their shoulder, like just to, are we gonna have bad press? Are we gonna upset people? Like the worst example, the second one I wanted to mention is the oath to the king, which is that was crazy. In 2022, after the election, the three PQ MNAs decided to not take the oath to the king, which is
correctly
mandatory.
That was correct.
That was absolutely correct. Decided not to, which meant that strictly speaking, they would not be allowed to take their seats. And then what did QS do? Oh, I guess they followed suit, but then immediately pledged an oath to the king because they said, oh, we need to be in parliament to pass a law against the oath to the king. So as the
that
PQ
shows
MNAs,
the problem with this mentality.
It encapsulates the problem of this cretinism, thinking the parliament is all important. They seem to believe in parliament more than the ruling class and the capitalist parties sometimes. But and then they went into parliament and it changed nothing. The CAC passed their own bill making the oath optional. So the PQ was seen that.
But they did that because of the PQ.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because the three PQ MNAs were actually standing their ground, which was absolutely correct. Yeah. So QS is just seen as a party that has no backbone on anything. Yeah. And actually, it's from that moment that dates the rise of the PQ. The PQ is riding high in the polls, they're first, which was, frankly, I did not expect that at all. And who would? Because they were dying.
Well, never underestimate the ability of the reformists to pull defeat out of the jaws of victory.
Exactly.
So that's basically what's happening.
No, that's what you saw with QS. And I think now with the GND resigning, it is... who cannot see that there's a crisis in QS? And there's more voices saying, oh, yeah, we need to be more unapologetic and all of that. And I think actually one thing that comes out of this is many people now in QS are saying, oh, there's a right-wing wave in the world, and it's very scary, and the left is doing badly around the world. I think that's an important point to address because they kind of blame a so-called right-wing wave for their problems. And I think this is absolutely...
It's the other way around.
It's absolutely wrong. And it's something you mentioned earlier in the discussion where, there is a huge crisis of capitalism. People are mad, people are angry, and looking to give the middle finger to the establishment. And the only people doing that are these right-wing demagogues like Trump. And honestly, I'll say that.
The left are hand in hand with the establishment.
Yeah,
reasonable,
Exactly, at a time where people are not looking for that. So then, actually, I would say this, like, the left has a thing or two to learn from Donald Trump because he doesn't apologize. He always stands his ground. And the establishment attacked him relentlessly.
He also doesn't seem to get depressed like the left.
Yeah.
Even when he's in the doldrums, you remember like a year or two ago, he looked like he was down and out.
After January 6th,
DeSantis was probably going to win the Republican leadership race. He had all these cases against him. He was actually low in the polls because of January 6th.
Yeah.
But he just kept fighting.
Yeah. No.
And so people see him as a fighter, as a principled fighter who does not give up, who does not wallow in self-despair like a lot of these lefties are doing now.
Yeah, and some people in QS are saying, oh, the media is so hard against us. Like, what do you expect? Actually, all the media in the U.S. was against Trump, and arguably that helped him because that
Yeah.
strengthened his
Actually, if
his
the media are
anti-establishment
criticizing you,
credential.
it means you're doing something good.
Exactly.
And actually,
yes.
any press is good press. You invite
Yeah.
it.
And obviously, Trump is a reactionary. I don't think that's stating the obvious. But the
No.
thing I'm saying here is that his anti-establishment image is something that the left would have a thing or to learn from. But they're scared, and it goes back to everything we've been saying, that they're scared of the capitalists and they don't believe we can fight them.
It's ultimately because they don't stand for anything.
Yeah.
Donald Trump stands for something. He has a certain view of the world and what he wants to do. It's not a good one.
Mhm.
But the left doesn't stand for anything.
Mhm.
So they're very depressed because they don't really stand for anything different than
Yeah.
the liberal establishment. Slightly different here and there, slight tweaks, but ultimately they stand for the same thing, which is why they're very depressed.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I guess maybe we can, I think we've been going on for about an hour here,
Mhm.
maybe more. But yeah, I think that's a good place to kind of shift on, like, what do we do?
Mhm.
what do we do? I think this really shows the bankruptcy of reformism, the bankruptcy of the left. And that's why we're building the Revolutionary Communist Party. We think first and foremost, what is happening in the world? If you're depressed, if you're looking at the situation and you can't understand why this is happening, you should become a Marxist. And not only should you become a Marxist, you have to get organized. Because this is not surprising for a Marxist. It's not surprising for an organized Marxist. I think there are some unorganized people who read Marxist theory, not really Marxists, but that are depressed anyway.
Mhm.
Because ultimately they don't see any other way things can go. And actually it is true. If you're alone, on your own, even if you understand what's happening, you can't change anything. You have to unite with others, and that's what we're doing in the Revolutionary Communist Party, to fight for a new society. We're absolutely confident in that with this crisis of capitalism, it's already producing massive questioning in society. People are looking for new ideas, and they are allergic to anyone who is tarnished with the establishment, with the parliament, with the institutions of the bourgeoisie. And and this is one of the lessons here, if you've tarnished yourself with that, if you appear as a reasonable parliamentarian, it doesn't make you look good. It makes you look bad. And so, yeah, we really need to, this is the mood in society. And it's actually got revolutionary implications to it. And actually, this is what communists, Marxists, revolutionary Marxists need to appeal to. And actually, we're fighting for a revolutionary approach on the left. And ultimately, really, that's really a big takeaway here, is when capitalism is declining, when capitalism's in crisis, you don't embrace the establishment. You fight against it.
Mhm.
You reject it, Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. Sorry.
And I think like the thing that the reformists have is a profound lack of faith in the working class. They do not believe
Yeah, that's a
the
central
working class
point.
can change society. And then they're stuck because there's a crisis of capitalism and they don't know what to do about it. They have nothing to offer. And I think this is, many people are in these left wing, like QS is a completely depressed environment right now.
Yeah.
Who knows where that's going to go? I have no idea. But the point is, we're actually optimists in this period. And where does this optimism come from? It comes from an understanding that the working class can change society, has the power to do so, is in a position to do so, has the numbers, and we need to organize it and give the right ideas to the working class. And that's why we're organizing in the ICP. And history has shown time and again that the workers will rise up. And you see this underlying mood of anger that's just seeking for a way to express itself. And that's what the RCP is about, to try to build this fighting organization, this party that can give a voice to the workers, a real one, and the real ideas. And I think, with the ideological backbone of Marxist ideas, that is also how you can resist all this pressure of the ruling class, of the media. And it's actually, to be honest, we should embrace being attacked by the media and the establishment.
Yeah, exactly.
As you said earlier, it's a good thing. So that's what we're building in the RCP, a communist organization that will fight for the leadership of the working class.
Yeah, so if you enjoyed this podcast, well, please get in touch. The left is lame because it's got bad ideas. That is ultimately the takeaway here. And we need to fight for correct ideas. We need to fight for Marxist ideas. We need to fight for a revolutionary perspective. And we need to actually fight for a new society, a new system against the capitalist system. We need to go back to the roots of the left. That is what the left ultimately was all about, but has moved so far away from this that it has become indiscernible, and therefore from the liberal establishment, and therefore is unpopular, and that is not surprising. But it's not. There's no need to be depressed about that. We need to take up the mantle of the great Marxist revolutionaries of the past, raise it high, and show people that there is a new way. And that is what we're trying to do with the Revolutionary Communist Party. So please get in touch with us.